Have you ever risked everything for love? Would you defy your entire family, your legacy, and generations of hatred for a chance at happiness? Listen to this heart-wrenching story of forbidden love that changed two families forever. The dividing line between the Caldwell and Sullivan properties had been drawn in blood long before I was born. I'm Ethan Caldwell, and for 3 generations, our families had been locked in a bitter feud that consumed our small town of Millfield, Virginia. This is the story of how I fell in love with the one person I was forbidden to even speak to, and how that love either destroyed or saved us all, depending on who's telling the story. Growing up as a Caldwell in Millfield meant inheriting not just my family's sprawling apple orchard, but also the weight of a hatred I never fully understood. The feud began with my grandfather and old man Sullivan arguing over water rights during a devastating drought in the 1950s. What started as a dispute over an irrigation ditch escalated when Sullivan's dam diverted the creek away from our eastern fields, killing 100 acres of young trees. My grandfather retaliated by blocking the only road that gave the Sullivans easy access to the highway, forcing them to drive an extra 40 minutes to reach town. "Never trust a Sullivan," my father would say at Sunday dinner, the warning delivered with the same gravity as scripture. "They'll smile to your face while slipping a knife between your ribs." I had no reason to question this inherited truth. The Caldwells and Sullivans moved in different circles, attended different churches, supported different political candidates. When we encountered each other in town, the air would crackle with tension. Civil nods were the best we could manage. Open hostility was more common. Our feud defined Millfield as much as the Blue Ridge Mountains that cradled our valley. I was 17 when I first spoke to Olivia Sullivan. We'd grown up in the same small town, attended the same high school, yet had never exchanged a single word, an impressive feat of mutual avoidance. I knew who she was, of course. Everyone did. The Sullivans' only daughter, with her father's green eyes and her mother's chestnut hair, was impossible to ignore. But we moved in separate orbits, 2 planets never meant to align, until the night of the storm. April in Virginia can be unpredictable, but no one expected the flash flood that swept through the lower valley that spring. I'd been checking on our southern orchard when the skies opened. The dirt road back to the main house quickly became impassable, so I sought shelter in the old equipment shed near the property line. I was soaked through, shivering as thunder cracked overhead, when the door flew open and Olivia Sullivan stumbled in, equally drenched and startled to find the shed occupied. "I didn't," she began, then recognition dawned. "You're Ethan Caldwell." "And you're trespassing on Caldwell land," I replied automatically, the response ingrained since childhood. She laughed, a surprising sound in the tense atmosphere. "Well, I can either trespass or drown. Your call." The storm raged for hours, trapping us together in that small space filled with rusty tools and the scent of machine oil. At first, we sat in awkward silence, as if speaking might violate some sacred rule, which in our family's eyes it would have. But as lightning illuminated the shed in stark flashes, revealing glimpses of each other, something shifted. "Why do you think they hate each other so much?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely audible above the rain hammering on the tin roof. "The water dispute," I answered automatically. "Your grandfather—" "I know that part," she interrupted. "But it was 70 years ago. Don't you think it's strange that we're still living out their fight? No one in my family had ever questioned the feud. It simply was, like the mountains or the changing seasons. But sitting there, watching Olivia wring water from her hair, I found myself wondering the same thing. My grandmother says there's more to the story," she continued when I didn't respond. "Something neither family talks about." "Like what?" She shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. "That's just it. She won't say either, just gets this sad look in her eyes and changes the subject." We talked for hours as the storm gradually subsided, about school, about books, about our dreams. Beyond Millfield, hers to study environmental science, mine to modernize the orchard with sustainable practices. By the time the rain stopped, I felt as though I'd known Olivia Sullivan all my life, and the idea that we were supposed to be enemies seemed increasingly absurd. "We should probably never speak again," she said as she prepared to leave, but her smile suggested she didn't mean it. "Probably," I agreed, equally insincere. "There's an old fire road that connects our properties through the backwoods," she offered. "No one uses it anymore." I knew the road she meant, overgrown, hidden from view, forgotten by most. "Tomorrow?" I suggested, surprising myself with my boldness. She nodded once, then slipped out into the night. I told myself it was curiosity, nothing more. That I'd meet her once, satisfy my interest in this forbidden Sullivan, and return to the comfortable hatred I'd been raised with. But one meeting became 2, then 5, then a dozen. We were careful, always meeting at the abandoned caretaker's cottage halfway between our properties, a neutral territory forgotten by both families. May turned to June, and I found myself inventing increasingly elaborate excuses to disappear for hours at a time. I told my father I was checking irrigation systems, told my friends I was working extra shifts at the packing house, told myself I was just being friendly to someone who, through no fault of her own, had been born on the wrong side of the feud. But by the time summer reached its peak, I could no longer lie to myself. I was falling in love with Olivia Sullivan, and the impossibility of our situation only intensified my feelings. "This can't end well," Olivia said one afternoon as we sat by the creek that had started our family's feud. "You know that, right?" I did know. Even in my most optimistic moments, I couldn't imagine a future where a Caldwell and a Sullivan could openly be together in Millfield. Our family's businesses were too interconnected with the town, the hatred too deeply rooted. We were living in a brief, beautiful bubble that would eventually burst. "We could leave," I suggested, not for the first time. "After graduation, go somewhere no one knows about Caldwells and Sullivans." She leaned her head against my shoulder, silent for a long moment. "And abandon everything, our families, our homes, if that's what it takes." "They would never forgive us," she said softly. "Maybe they don't have to." The summer stretched. On golden and tense, we became experts at deception, at stolen moments and careful alibis. But as August waned and our senior year approached, the pressure began to mount. We couldn't continue in secret forever. Eventually, someone would see us, would tell our families. The thought of discovery filled me with both dread and, strangely, relief. At least then the pretense would be over. The discovery, when it came, was worse than I had imagined. My cousin Tyler had followed me on one of my orchard inspections, suspicious of my frequent disappearances. He watched from the tree line as Olivia and I met at our cottage, witnessed our embrace, our kiss, and rather than confronting me directly, he went straight to my father. I returned home that evening to find my father waiting on the porch, his face carved from stone, my mother crying in the kitchen beyond. "Is it true?" he demanded without preamble. "Are you involved with the Sullivan girl?" There was no point in denying it. "Her name is Olivia," I said, a defiance in my voice I'd never dared use with my father before. The explosion I expected didn't come. Instead, my father's face seemed to collapse in on itself, aging years in seconds. "Inside," he said quietly. "This isn't a conversation for the neighbors." The kitchen felt airless as my father paced, and my mother wiped her tears with shaking hands. I stood awkwardly between them, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" my father finally asked. any concept of how this affects more than just you and your feelings. He spat the last word as if it tasted foul. The feud is pointless, I argued. No one even remembers how it started. This isn't about water rights, my mother interjected, her voice surprisingly sharp. It's about trust, about loyalty. The Sullivans have tried to ruin us for generations. Olivia hasn't tried to ruin anyone. She's a Sullivan, my father interrupted, and that's all she'll ever be to this family. Whatever you think you feel for her, it can't overcome that basic fact. I looked between them. These people who had raised me, who I'd respected and obeyed my entire life, and for the first time, I saw not authority figures, but flawed humans clinging to an outdated hatred. I love her, I said simply. And if you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong in this family. My father's face hardened. If you continue this relationship, you won't be welcome in this house. The orchard will go to your cousin, your inheritance, your place here, all of it, gone. It wasn't an idle threat. The Caldwell orchard was my birthright, my future, my identity. To walk away from it would be to cut out a piece of myself. But standing there facing my parents' ultimatum, I realized that loving Olivia had already changed me in ways I couldn't reverse. I need to think, I said, backing toward the door. I need some air. I drove aimlessly for hours, the same circular, thoughts chasing each other through my mind. Could I really give up everything for Olivia, my family, my home, my future? Was that fair to ask of either of us? By the time I reached the Sullivan property, it was well past midnight. I hadn't planned to come here, but some instinct, some need to see Olivia pulled me forward. I didn't expect to find her house ablaze with lights, cars parked haphazardly in the driveway. I didn't expect to see her sitting on the front steps, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. And I certainly didn't expect her father to be standing guard over her, his expression murderous as I approached. "Get off my property," Robert Sullivan growled, stepping between me and Olivia. "Dad, please." Olivia looked up, her face tear-streaked, eyes red. "Just let me talk to him." "You've done enough talking," he snapped. "Inside, now." She didn't move. "I'm 18 years old. You can't lock me away." "Watch me." He turned back. To me. "This ends tonight, boy. Whatever you think is happening between you and my daughter is over. Go back to your family and forget you ever spoke to her." Behind him, Olivia's mother appeared in the doorway. "Robert, this isn't helping. Let them talk. Stay out of this, Margaret," he barked without turning around. I stood my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to retreat. "I just want 5 minutes with Olivia, then I'll go." "Dad," Olivia's voice cracked. "Please." Something in her tone must have reached him, because after a long, tense moment, Robert Sullivan stepped aside. 5 minutes, in the front yard where I can see you, then you leave my property and don't come back." We moved to the oak tree at the edge of their lawn, far enough for privacy, but still within view of the house. Olivia's hand found mine immediately, squeezing so tight it almost hurt. "Tyler told your father," I said, the pieces falling into place. "And your father called mine." She nodded miserably. There was so much yelling, things I didn't even know about. Old grievances, accusations. "My dad says your family tried to buy our land from underneath us during the recession. Your dad apparently spread rumors that our apples were contaminated with pesticides 3 seasons ago." Each revelation felt like another weight added to my shoulders. The feud was deeper, more toxic than either of us had realized. "They're threatening to disown me," I admitted. "Cut me off completely if I don't end things with you." Her eyes, swimming with tears, met mine. "Mine too. Dad says he'll pull my college fund, that I can't work in the family business." She took a shuddering breath. Ethan, what are we going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night, and suddenly the answer seemed obvious. Terrifying, but obvious. We leave, I said. Tonight. I have some savings. We pack what we can carry and just go. Start over somewhere new. That's crazy, she whispered, but I could see the consideration in her eyes. Crazier than living. Our whole lives according to a feud we didn't start. Crazier than giving up each other because our last names don't match. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze drifting back to the house where her parents watched from the window. They're my family, Ethan, despite everything. I don't know if I can just walk away. I don't either, I admitted, but I don't see another option. They're never going to accept us together. Maybe they just need time, she suggested, but we both knew it was wishful thinking. The confrontation tonight had only hardened the battle lines. Think about it, I said, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. I'll come back tomorrow night. If you want to go, be ready. If not, I couldn't finish the thought. I left her there, under the oak tree, walked past her father's glare without flinching, and drove home through the Virginia night with my mind racing. Could we really do this? Just leave everything behind? I had a little over $8,000 saved for college. My truck was old, but reliable. We could head west, maybe, find work in a place where Caldwells and Sullivans were just names, not warring dynasties. By the time I reached home, a strange calm had settled over me. Whatever happened next, something fundamental had changed. I could never go back to being the obedient Caldwell son, blindly accepting the feud as my inheritance. For better or worse, loving Olivia had broken that part of me forever. I didn't speak to my parents the next day. They didn't seek me out either. The silence in our house heavy with unspoken ultimatums. I packed methodically, clothes, toiletries, the cash from my bank account, the pocket watch my grandfather had given me, just the essentials, nothing that would immediately betray my intentions. As sunset approached, I wrote a letter explaining my decision, placed it on my bed, and slipped out to my truck. I didn't allow myself to look back at the house, afraid that sentiment might weaken my resolve. Instead, I drove toward the Sullivan property with my heart hammering in my chest, uncertain whether Olivia would be waiting or if I was about to embark on this journey alone. I parked a quarter-mile from her house, at the entrance to the old fire road where we'd first agreed to meet. If she was coming, this is where she would find me. I sat in my truck, engine off, watching the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. 10 minutes past our agreed time, then 20. My hope began to fade. She wasn't coming. She had chosen her family, her security, her future over our uncertain path. I couldn't blame her. Hadn't I been wrestling with the same impossible choice? Still, the knowledge cut deep. I was about to start the engine, to drive away from Millfield alone, when a flash of movement caught my eye. Olivia emerged from the trees, a backpack slung over her shoulders, her face set in determined lines. When she saw me, her expression broke into a mixture of relief and fear. "I thought you might have left without me," she said as she climbed into the passenger seat, tossing her bag into the back. "Never," I promised, reaching for her hand. "Are you sure about this?" "Once we leave, I'm sure," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. "I left them a note, told them I love them, but I can't live by their rules anymore." I nodded, understanding exactly what that letter had cost her to write. The same pain I had felt, penning my own goodbye. "Where should we go?" She took a deep breath, squeezing my hand. "Anywhere. As long as we're together, I don't care." I started the engine, heart full of a conflicting mixture of grief and hope. We were leaving behind everything familiar, our homes, our families, our planned futures, trading certainty for the unknown. But as I guided the truck onto the main road, Olivia's hand warm in mine, I couldn't help feeling that we were also driving toward something, not just away. We made it 37 miles before the past caught up with us. The roadblock appeared suddenly, police cars with flashing lights, and behind them two familiar vehicles, my father's truck, Olivia's mother's SUV. They called the police, Olivia whispered, her face draining of color. They reported us missing. We're adults, I reminded her, though my mouth had gone dry. They can't force us to go back. But as I pulled over, officers approaching with flashlights, the reality of our situation hit home. We might be legally adults, but we were barely out of high school, running away in the night with limited funds and no real plan. How naive we had been to think we could just disappear. The next hour passed in a blur of harsh words and accusations. Our parents had indeed reported us missing, suggesting we might be in danger or not thinking clearly. Now, face to face in the harsh glare of police headlights, their fear had transformed to anger. "Get in the car, Olivia," her father demanded. "This charade is over." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she replied. Standing so close to me, our shoulders touched. We made our decision. A childish, reckless decision, my father countered. Running away in the middle of the night? What exactly was your plan? Where were you going to live? How were you going to support yourselves? They were reasonable questions for which we had no good answers. Our plan, such as it was, had been fueled more by desperation than logic. The police officers, clearly uncomfortable with this family drama, began to step back. "Look, they're both 18. Legally, they can go where they want. But," one officer added, looking at us sympathetically, "maybe you two should think this through a bit more. Running away rarely solves problems." I felt Olivia trembling beside me, saw the tears she was fighting to hold back. For all her brave words, this confrontation was breaking her heart. The realization struck me suddenly that in trying to escape our family's feud, we had only deepened it, created a new chapter in the bitter history between Caldwells and Sullivans. "This has to stop," I said quietly, addressing all of them. "Not just for us, but for all of you too. This feud, it's poisoning everything it touches." "Save the dramatics," Robert Sullivan snapped. "This isn't about some feud. It's about you seducing my daughter, turning her against her family." "That's not what happened," Olivia protested, but her voice was drowned out by my father's response. "Typical Sullivan. Always the victim," he sneered. "Maybe if you'd raised your daughter with a sense of loyalty." "Stop it!" the shout came. Not from me or Olivia, but from Margaret Sullivan, who had been silent until now. "Just stop, all of you." She stepped forward, her face pale in the flashing police lights. "This has gone on long enough. 3 generations of hatred, and for what? What has it gotten any of us except misery?" "Margaret," her husband warned, but she ignored him, looking instead at my father with an expression I couldn't read. "James," she said, addressing my father by his first name, something I'd never heard a Sullivan do. "It's time they knew. Both families. We can't keep pretending." My father seemed to deflate, the anger draining from him. "It won't change anything," he said, but without conviction. "What are they talking about?" I asked Olivia, but she looked as confused as I felt. Margaret Sullivan took a deep breath, her gaze moving between her husband, my parents, and finally settling on Olivia and me. "The feud didn't start with water rights," she said quietly. "That was just the public reason. The real cause was—" She hesitated, then continued more firmly. "Your grandfather, Ethan, and Olivia's grandmother were in love. They were planning to marry, to join the 2 properties. But there was an accident, a fire in the Sullivan barn. James's younger brother was trapped inside." I turned to my father, shocked. I'd never heard of him having a brother. "Samuel Caldwell blamed Vernon Sullivan for the fire." My mother continued the story, her voice hollow. "Claimed he'd been careless with lanterns. Vernon's daughter, Olivia's, Grandmother was forced to choose sides. She chose her family. And that choice, Margaret finished, has been punishing both families ever since. The water dispute was real, but it was fueled by personal betrayal, by grief, by a love that turned to hatred. Silence fell over our strange roadside gathering. The police officers had retreated to their vehicles, sensing this was beyond their jurisdiction. The revelation hung in the air, reshaping everything I thought I knew about my family, about the feud, about Olivia and me. "History is repeating itself," I said finally, looking at Olivia, whose eyes were wide with understanding. "Except this. Our time, we're trying to choose each other, not our families, and you're still forcing the same impossible choice." My father looked older suddenly, the lines in his face deeper in the harsh light. "It's not that simple, Ethan." "It could be," Olivia said quietly, "if you would all just let go of the past." Robert Sullivan ran a hand over his face, the gesture making him look unexpectedly vulnerable. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," I acknowledged. "But it's necessary, for all of us. This feud has taken enough from both families." What followed was not an immediate reconciliation. There were no tearful embraces or instant forgiveness. Instead, there was something almost more valuable, a fragile, tentative truce. We agreed to return to Millfield, to put our escape plan on hold, but with the understanding that Olivia and I would not be forbidden from seeing each other. Our parents, in turn, agreed to at least try to move beyond decades of enmity. The drive back to Millfield was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Olivia rode with her parents, me with mine, a physical separation that felt symbolic of the distance still between our families. But something fundamental had shifted. The truth, long buried, had finally been spoken aloud. The next weeks were difficult, filled with tense family dinners and awkward encounters in town, as word spread that a Caldwell and a Sullivan were openly dating. Some people seemed scandalized, others curious, a few even supportive. The minister at Olivia's church pulled her aside to express concerns about being unequally yoked, while my uncle temporarily stopped speaking to my father. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. My father and Robert Sullivan met for coffee at the neutral territory of the town diner, a summit that townsfolk still talk about. They didn't emerge as friends, but they didn't come to blows either, which counted as progress. My mother invited Margaret Sullivan to the garden club meeting she hosted, a small olive branch that was cautiously accepted. Olivia and I proceeded with our original plans for college, though we chose schools within driving distance of each other rather than running away to the unknown. The separation was difficult, but we visited each other every weekend, our relationship growing stronger, without the shadow of secrecy. Most surprisingly, our families began the slow, painful work of dismantling the feud. Joint community projects, cautious business collaborations, even a shared Thanksgiving dinner that, while awkward, passed without major incident. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and there were setbacks, arguments that revived ancient grudges, moments when the weight of history threatened to crush our fragile peace. But we persevered, all of us, because the alternative, returning to the hatred that had defined our families for generations, was finally recognized as the tragedy it was. 5 years have passed since that night by the roadside. Olivia and I graduated college and returned to Millfield, not as fugitives, but as agents of change. We've started a joint venture between the Caldwell and Sullivan properties, a farm-to-table operation that showcases the best of both families' agricultural traditions. My father and Robert Sullivan still disagree regularly, but now it's about business strategies, rather than perceived slights from decades past. Last month, under the same oak tree where we once said a desperate goodbye, I asked Olivia to marry me. The engagement party that followed brought both families together in celebration, something that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. As I look around at the life we're building, at the healing taking place in our families and our community, I can't help but wonder, what if we had succeeded in running away that night? What if we had chosen escape over confrontation? We might have found our own happiness, but the wounds here in Millfield would have continued to fester, the cycle of hatred passing to yet another generation. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't to leave, but to stay and fight for change, to stand firm in the face of tradition and say, "This ends with us." The past does not have to dictate the future. Love, against all odds, can break the chains of inherited hatred. So I ask you, what would you have done in our place? Run away to protect your love, or stayed to heal the wounds of generations? Was our decision to return and face our families the right one? Or should we have continued on our own path, leaving the feud behind? I still don't know if we made the perfect choice, but I do know this. Sometimes the most impossible love stories are the ones most worth fighting for.